everyone. My name is Paul Glevy. I'm a professor of the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Minnesota, and I'm going to talk to you about how to measure effectiveness and cost effectiveness of school things, and then give you a preview of a new study that we did evaluating the Pioneer School program in Morocco. Okay, so this is just an outline of what I'm going to talk about. Okay, first I'll talk about what we mean by impact or effectiveness and how do we measure it, and then I'll talk about an evaluation of Morocco's Pioneer School program. Okay, so a definition of impact or effectiveness, they're almost the same thing, is that we really need to compare two things. What happens when the program is implemented, and what would have happened if the program had not been implemented. The difference between those two things is the measure of the effectiveness or the impact of the program, okay? And I'll show you some graphs now that'll kind of make it more easy to understand what we're talking about here. Okay, now, there's good news and bad news about how to measure this. Okay. There's good news and bad news about how to measure this. The good news is that we usually can get data on what happens when the program is implemented. The bad news is that we usually do not have any information on what would have happened if the program had not been implemented. And so what would have happened we call the counterfactual. It didn't actually happen as counter to fact because the program was implemented, okay? So the problem we have is that the counterfactual has not, we don't see it, it's not observed. And so what we need to do to measure the effectiveness or the impact of a program is to come up with a good way to measure or to mimic the counterfactual. So, okay. All right, okay, I hope people can hear me better this way. I see there's also a countdown there for my time. So what here is, this little graph here, there's something we're measuring on the vertical axis, an outcome. It could be you know, the test scores of the children. It could be some other thing that we want the children to be doing, the students to be doing. And then on the horizontal axis is time. And these 5 yellow dots here are what happens before the program starts, okay? And now the next 3 yellow dots are what happens after the program starts. We measure this, we can measure this, that's not a problem, okay? But what we don't measure is what would have happened if the program had not started. Now you might look at this and say, oh, I know how to measure the impact of the program. It's the difference between the 5th dot, the one when the program started, and the last dot, the last thing. Everything that happened between those 2 time periods is the impact of the program. But that may not be the case. So if you look at this counterfactual, the blue dots here, what this is showing is what would have happened if the program had not been there. And you see that maybe, you know, even without the program, there would have been an increase in this outcome. And so it would be misleading to measure the impact by looking at the 5th yellow dot and the 8th yellow dot, okay? What you really need to measure is the difference between the last yellow dot and the last blue dot. That measures the program impact, okay? But the problem, as I said before, is that we don't actually see the counterfactual, okay? But the point here is to show you that it would have been a mistake to say that the impact was the difference between the dot when the yellow dot when the program starts and the yellow dot at the end point. Now, I'm going to keep those yellow dots the same, but now I'm going to show you a different counterfactual. The yellow dots don't change, but what maybe the counterfactual would have been that, okay? We don't know. We'll have to figure out how to measure that. But maybe the counterfactual was those blue dots there. In that case, the impact of the program is actually negative. The program was not successful. It made the outcome, maybe the test scores of children, decline, okay? But again, we don't know what it is because we don't know the counterfactual. And then the last picture here to look at is now we're changing the yellow dots. Things kind of get worse as time goes by, and you might think, oh, and we can measure all these yellow dots. You might say that, oh, I guess the program didn't really work because the outcome went down. But it may be that something else was happening during this time. Maybe there was, you know, some you know, like COVID happened or schools closed for some reason, and it may be that the counterfactual was worse, okay? In that case, the counterfactual, the impact is actually slightly positive, the difference between the last blue dot and the last green dot. But if you had just looked at the yellow dots, you would not have known that the program was effective. Okay? So let me keep going on. So the important thing is this counterfactual, or what we sometimes call the control groups. We need to have a set of students or schools that were not in the program to use as our counterfactual, you know, what would have happened, okay? And then by comparing that control group, or our estimate of what would have happened, our estimate of the counterfactual, and what actually happened, we can get the causal effect of this program on whatever the outcome is that we want, okay? Okay, so there's different ways to measure the counterfactual, okay? And almost always you have to do it by looking at some people that did not participate in the program, okay? So we call that group the counterfactual, or the control group, or the comparison group. So what we're going to do is compare, like basically going back a little bit to these slides that I was showing you. I'll go to the one that makes the program look good. This one. We need to come up with those blue dots. We need to get the counterfactual. And then we're going to get those blue dots by looking at schools or students that did not participate in the program. So that's what we're going. And the difference between those students who didn't participate, who are very similar to the ones who did participate, that's going to be our estimate of the impact or the effectiveness of the program. Okay? So how we select this control group is a key decision in doing an effectiveness study or impact evaluation. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay? Now, let me just give you an example here. This was a scholarship program for students in low-income families who are high-achieving. So not everyone in the low-income families got it, but the scholarship was only to high-achieving students, okay? So suppose we want to measure the impact of this program. I think it was done in a different country. We need to know, well, what would have happened if those students had not been in the program, okay? And one thing you might do is look at another group of students who are not in the program, but we think you know, we can use them as comparison group, okay? So these are the students. This little thing in the upper left is the students in the program. They're from low-income families and they're high-achieving students. And then this, we might say, well, let's take some other students from low-income families, okay, that are not in the program. But the ones who are not in the program from the low-income families are the ones who are not high-achieving. So already we know that those students are going to have lower test scores than the ones in the high-achieving program, okay? So if you kind of look at these two groups of students, and the high-achieving ones got the program, the scholarship, and you look at their performance, like maybe on the right side of this diagram, it's a test score, you know, a test on mathematics or Arabic or French or whatever you want to test them on. You might say, oh, this program works really well because the people in the program scored higher on the test. But they were already, you know, better than average students. That's why they got the scholarship. So this is really not a good way to evaluate the program. Okay, so what's the best way? Most researchers, including me, would say that the best way is to randomly assign people to the program, have what we call a randomized evaluation. Okay, so the idea here is that there's a group of people who are eligible for the program. Like in that example I gave, they would be high-achieving students from low-income families. And what we're going to do to get a comparable comparison group or comparable control group is randomly divide these students up. Some of them, or maybe it's randomly done at the school level, some of them are going to get the program that's in the middle, the top half in the middle, that's the treatment group, and then some of them randomly chosen do not get the program. That's the comparison group or the control group. And that way we know that these two groups of students are pretty much the same. There's really no difference between them because they're randomly put into the two groups, but one of them, the top group, got the program and the other one did not. Okay, so the only reason their test scores would be different, or whatever the outcome is, would be different, is because the top group got the program. So this is what we would say is the best way to evaluate a program, if you can do it. Sometimes you can't do a randomized evaluation, but if you can, I would highly recommend it. Okay? So the method matters, okay? And we need to get a counterfactual so that we can estimate the causal effect of the program. There's different ways of doing it. I'll talk about another method before, but if possible, we recommend doing a randomized evaluation. Now in this last bullet point here, you can see that there's a bold, if properly designed and conducted. Okay, it is possible to do a randomized evaluation, but not do it very well. In that case, it's not going to give you reliable results. So that's something to keep in mind here. Okay, and I can give you some examples of ones that didn't go well, including some I've done. Okay, but I won't tell you that yet. Okay, so basically, if you use another method, we need some other assumptions that you need to make, and sometimes they can be tested, the assumptions sometimes not, but we can. Okay. Now, just very quickly, when we do these evaluations, we need to get data for them. There's basically two kinds of sources. One is data that's already out there, like administrative data, publicly available data sets. There's lots of things here. In the case of education, it can be whatever the Ministry of Education collects from all the schools and the students. The second thing at the bottom is new data or primary data. And we actually did that when we were doing this evaluation of the Pioneer School program. You can administer our own examinations or assessments. We can do surveys. We can do focus groups and things like that. So here's some examples of if you're going to collect your own data. And I have to warn you, if you're going to collect your own data, it's going to cost some money. It's not it could be relatively expensive, although sometimes it could not be very expensive. Okay. Exams, in Morocco there are exams that can be used, but also maybe they don't do them for every grade, maybe only for some grades, so we may have to do our own exams for other grades. And then there's, the standardized ones are the ones that already exist in the Ministry of Education, but the second one, researcher administered student assessments, those are ones that we implement ourselves because we want to measure something that may be out there. And then finally, you could also look at, if we're looking at a program that changes how teachers teach in the classroom, we can actually look to see if the teachers teach. We can have these classroom observations where somebody sits in the back of the classroom and watches the teacher, or we can ask students, give them little questionnaires about what their teacher does in the classroom, or we can just give the questionnaires to the teachers, ask them what they're doing in the classroom. We do this both for the treated people and the control group, so we can kind of see what the difference is. And this helps us understand not only did the program work, but what really worked about it, what really changed in the classroom that made the program work. Okay? Actually, this slide I think we can go very quickly because I think everyone here thinks that education is important, but just education is important for its own sake, but also because it leads to higher incomes and better health, better civic participation, and even better economic performance. Okay, one thing just to point out is that there's been a kind of a shift sort of at the global level of organizations like the World Bank and the United Nations about what we're looking for in education. Many of you may have heard of the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs. Those were kind of first put out in the year 2000, and they had goals by the year 2015. The main education goal was that all children finish primary school, okay? Now, 2015, some countries made that, others did not, but then the new thing now is the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, and these are getting at the point that we really need to make sure that the students are actually learning something when they're in school, because let me show you the next graph. There's something we can call learning poverty, which is how many children by age 10 are unable to read a very simple text. And unfortunately, in many low-income and middle-income countries, it's very high. And you see in this diagram the levels. And the yellow is actually Middle East and North Africa, where Morocco is. And you see that, roughly speaking, for all those countries in Middle East and North Africa, about 63% of the children who are age 10 were unable to read a simple text. So what we really need to work on is quality of the education. We're getting kids into school, but we need to make sure that they learn more. Okay, so what are we going to do? Another sort of initiative by the World Bank and the UNDP, or UNICEF, United Nations, and also by the USAID and the British FCDO, was to put together an advisory panel, which a few years ago, actually just last year, came out with this report called the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel. And they came up with what they call goodbyes. But let me tell you, when I say measuring impact or effectiveness, I've been saying, okay, let's look at the test scores or whatever you want to look at of children in the treatment group and the control group, and that will tell you what the effect of the program. However, that measures effectiveness or impact, okay? But there's, being an economist, we also care about how much it costs. So there's another concept which we call cost effectiveness, which is the effect of the program divided by the cost per student of implementing the program. You could have two programs where program number one is more effective, has higher, maybe has 50% bigger effect on student test scores than the other one, but if that program costs 5 times as much, maybe that's not a very good buy, okay? So if you just look at the top of that ratio there, you might say, okay, this is the program we should adopt because it has the strongest impact. But if the cost is very high, you may not be able to afford to adopt it in all the schools. And so then what you really should be looking at is the cost effectiveness ratio. And that's defined this way. I'll give you some numbers from that report I was referring to. These are showing, now let me just point out something. This is actually, the outcome here is years of education. The very first one, it looks like on average has a big effect. So the blue square in the middle of those long green flat things, whatever you want to call them, flat bars, that's the average, okay? But if you look at the top one, there's only 2 studies. One of them, the effect was 0, and the other one, the effect was very large in terms of how many years of education you get for $100, okay? The problem with that is that we don't know for another country, which one are you going to be? Are you going to be the average, the blue square, or are you going to be in the top, or are you going to be in the bottom? Okay, so all these things we have to be very careful about, that they're averages over many countries. This looks at individual countries' studies of different things and the test scores, but the point about this one is that there are these thin black lines that you can see sticking out somewhere. They have 2 endpoints on them. These are confidence intervals, for those of you who are familiar with statistics, which means that the true effect is somewhere along that long black line. And in fact, in many of these things, that long black line is very long, so you're going to be somewhere in there, but you'd like to know where. And the problem with some of these studies is that the sample sizes were small, so they were not very precisely estimated, and we don't know what the true thing is because of the small sample. Okay, so let me just finish talking about that before talking about the Pioneer School program, is that there were 3, what that panel called great buys. 2 of them were used in the Pioneer School program. On the left, the great buys, the second one and the third one, structured pedagogy and teaching at the right level, those were used. And I saw outside in the back there was a whole booth about teaching at the right level, and there's probably another one on structured pedagogy. Okay, so now let's talk about the impact that we measured for Morocco's Pioneer School program. Okay, so this just tells you the setup by the Ministry of Education in Morocco. It's a whole program of things that are going on, and it's also being done in cooperation with the Morocco Innovation and Evaluation Lab, which is the JPAL affiliated. JPAL is the Poverty Action Lab, which is at MIT in the US, and also with the University Muhammad VI, UM6P. Okay? What is this program? Well, probably all of you know it. If you're a primary school teacher, you've probably heard about it, and some of you may have been implementing it. Okay? So the purpose of this program was to increase learning, student learning in primary schools. The very first time it was implemented was in this 23-24 school year. There are about 21,000 primary schools in Morocco, and 626 participated in the program, and they were spread out throughout that. By the way, it says 9%, but that actually is wrong. It's more like about 2%, okay? But it was, in these 626 schools were in many different regions in Morocco. I think they're all the regions, and it involved about 12,000 teachers. Probably some of you in this room are part of that, and about 300,000 students, okay? So what we wanted to do was measure the effect of this program. Now let me tell you just very quickly what the program does. As I mentioned before, structured pedagogy, giving teachers detailed lesson plans, scripted lessons to use, teaching at the right level. So at the very beginning of the school year, there was about 3 or 4 weeks where the students were divided up into their skill level, and they were taught at where their skill level was, and then they went back to sort of the usual thing going on for the rest of the year, but every week there was also a session of teaching at the right level, okay? And we can talk about details later. Finally, some teachers were specializing in either French, Arabic, or math to be like specialized teachers, and then there was a school management component to that and a certification process. Okay. Now, what we want to do with this evaluation is measure the impact on mathematics, French, and Arabic, and that will provide guidance to how well the program is working and who the beneficiaries are. Okay, although I highly recommend randomized trials to implement it, we could not do that here. So we did differences with matching. What does that mean? Well, differences is you take, we had these 626 schools out of 21,000, and then we got data on those schools and data on all the other schools in Morocco, and we picked another 626 that were very similar in terms of the data at the ministry, and actually that's the second step, that's the matching, okay? And then the first step, when we had these matched schools, the difference in difference means you look at the change in the test scores over time. So the first difference is how the test score changed in the two groups of schools, the treated schools, control schools. The second difference is comparing the changes in the two schools, okay? And then there's information there about the data, but let's go on and see what happened. The bottom line is we had very large effects of this program. So you see that on average over French, Arabic, and math, there was a 0.9 standard deviation impact on this. And for French, it was the largest, it was about 1.3. And to give you an idea of what that means, I'll just do it from here. So that for French, the average student, the median student in a pioneer school was now at the level of the 90th percent of a student in the control group or the comparison group. And math did almost as well, the median student was at 82%, and then Arabic a little less well, but still these are very big impacts. They're so big that people at the World Bank are already sending us emails about this, okay? And there was a study done by Evans and Yuan that showed that they were looking at many different interventions in many different schools, and the effect for Morocco was at the 99% level. We never have seen anything that quite large, okay? The Arabic was a little bit lower, but still these are huge effects, so the program seems well. Also, the effects were the same for male and female students. They were same for different grade levels and different levels of initial performance on math and Arabic and French, okay? So it seems that everyone benefited from this program, okay? So the last thing I wanted to tell you is that this is what we think we should do next, okay? That program had two things. It had the teaching at the right level, TARL, and it also had structured pedagogy. We would like to do a randomized controlled trial where we try each of those components separately, because it may be that one of them is really doing most of the work, and if that's the case, maybe we don't need to do the other one. Okay, I'm afraid I ran out of time, but thank you very much for your attention, and I'm not really sure what's happening next, but